So picture this. It's 1990, right? And you have this young man, he's thousands of feet up in the air, flying over this really dense forest in a tiny, private, two-seater plane.
A very small plane.
Yeah, and his father is actually the one piloting it. His dad was a former U.S. Air Force pilot. So just flying along, and suddenly the son turns to his dad and totally calmly announces that he is Casper the Friendly Ghost.
Which is just a terrifying thing to hear mid-flight.
Right, because in his mind, ghosts can't be hurt. So he leans right across the cockpit, grabs the keys out of the ignition,
Oh my God.
and literally throws them out the window, just right out of the moving plane.
I mean, the engine just immediately dies. There's no power.
Nothing.
You're just sitting in an unpowered hunk of metal falling out of the sky.
It's insane.
And the father, who, thank God, has all this military flight training, he essentially has to glide this dead weight down into a canopy of trees.
Like aiming for the branches.
Yeah, the plane is just utterly destroyed, completely sheared apart by the trees. But miraculously, they both somehow walk away with only minor injuries.
It's unbelievable. And the young man who threw those keys into the sky, that was Daniel Johnston.
Wow. Yeah.
So welcome to this deep dive. Today, you and I are looking through a massive stack of biographical sources to really try and understand this guy. Because Johnston survived that kind of, terrifying, chaotic break from reality, yet he somehow became this defining foundational pillar of outsider, alternative, and lo-fi music.
He really did.
His art is always described as being so pure or like earnest and childlike, but the actual reality of his life and his mind was just incredibly complicated.
It is. It's this staggering duality, you know?
Right.
To really grasp his story, we have to look at it as this serious examination of the intersection between raw creativity and, frankly, severe mental illness. He navigated bipolar disorder for his entire adult life. He endured extended periods in psychiatric institutions. But running parallel to that personal struggle is the story of the modern music industry itself.
Oh, total.
We really have to examine how the corporate machinery of the 1990s interacted with that specific kind of vulnerable genius. And, well, whether they were equipped to handle it at all.
Spoiler alert, they weren't. But let's start with how he built his foundation, because his origins completely bypassed the traditional music industry route. Totally. He was born in Sacramento, California, but he grew up in New Cumberland, West Virginia.
The youngest of 5 kids, right?
Yeah, youngest of 5.
Yeah.
And he had this really brief stint at Abilene Christian University in West Texas, but that only lasted a few weeks before he dropped out. Eventually, he finds himself in the art program at Kent State University in Ohio.
Which is where things really start to take shape.
Exactly. This is where he starts recording his early cassette tapes.
Yeah.
With titles like Songs of Pain. But the actual way he recorded them is just so crucial to who he was.
Oh, absolutely. We really need to look at the mechanism of his recording process here because it essentially birthed the modern lo-fi genre.
It really did.
In the late 1970s, he buys this cheap $59 Sanyo boombox.
$59.
Right. And this was a monaural setup. So that means it only recorded one flat channel of audio. There's no fancy studio.
I'll soundproof it.
No mixing board, nothing. He would just sit in a room completely alone, hit record, and sing over a piano or this really rudimentary chord organ.
So every single time he pressed record, the microphone wasn't just like capturing his voice, it was capturing the whole room.
Yes.
It caught the hiss of the tape, the clack of the piano keys, maybe a chair squeaking in the background.
Precisely. And that lack of polish, that's what creates the magic.
It's so raw.
When you strip away all that studio compression and slick production, your brain actually has to lean in closer to hear the lyrics through the static.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
It creates this intense, almost uncomfortable sense of intimacy for the listener. You literally feel like you are sitting on the floor of his bedroom while he just pours his heart out.
Yeah.
That mechanical limitation of a cheap Sanyo boombox, it became his greatest aesthetic asset. It completely removed the barrier between the creator and the audience.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second because his distribution method is just as fascinating as his recording method. And it relies on that exact same lack of barriers.
Right.
So eventually, in the 1980s, he decides to move down to Austin, Texas. But he doesn't just, buy a bus ticket. He actually travels there by working for a traveling carnival.
Running a corn dog stand.
Yes, running a corn dog stand. So once he finally lands in Austin, he gets a job working the counter at a local McDonald's.
Mm-hmm.
And here is where his strategy becomes just, brilliant.
So smart.
He starts handing out his homemade cassette tapes to the customers, just right along with their food.
And you have to remember, he would record a tape, and because he didn't have, like, a fast dubbing machine to make copies, he would often just perform the entire album again to make a single copy.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Every tape was essentially a live, totally unique performance.
That is wild. Imagine you're just walking into a McDonald's in 1985 Austin, expecting a burger, and the guy behind the counter slides you a homemade, hand-drawn cassette tape.
Right.
If you think about it, he was basically running a primitive, physical version of a viral social media algorithm.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. Like today, an artist will just spam a platform with daily videos, hoping the algorithm eventually forces the audience to pay attention. Johnston just used sheer earnest repetition in the physical world.
He bypassed the gatekeepers completely.
Exactly. He forced the local scene to pay attention by just physically placing his art right into their hands.
And we really have to consider the cultural environment of Austin at that exact moment, too.
Oh, for sure.
By the mid-1980s, mainstream music was entirely dominated by MTV. It was slick, it was highly synthesized, deeply commercial.
Big hair, drum machines.
Exactly,
Yeah.
polished pop. So in direct reaction to that, Austin actually became the birthplace of this movement called New Sincerity.
No sincerity, right?
Yeah, the local bands were actively rejecting all that irony and polish, and instead they favored raw, unvarnished emotional performances.
So when Johnston shows up with these, hissy, imperfect cassette tapes featuring a guy just pouring out his absolute soul over a cheap chord organ, it's a total shock to the system.
It resonated so deeply because it was the ultimate expression of that New Sincerity ethos.
It was real.
It was the antidote to the era's artificiality, really. His local fame just compounded rapidly. By 1985, this strategy of aggressive, hand-to-hand grassroots distribution, it actually landed him on national television.
Which is crazy for a guy at McDonald's.
Totally. MTV had this program called The Cutting Edge, which spotlighted alternative scenes, and they featured Johnston playing live right there in Austin.
But making the leap from being a local curiosity on a late-night alternative show to becoming the center of a massive major label bidding war, that requires a tectonic shift in pop culture.
A huge shift.
And surprisingly, it all came down to a piece of clothing and just how information traveled before the internet existed.
This part is a masterclass in the mechanics of cultural influence.
Yeah.
So a music journalist named Everett True gave a copy of Johnston's 1983 tape, Hi, How Are You?, to Kurt Cobain of Nirvana.
And Cobain genuinely loved it.
He did. He started wearing this promotional T-shirt featuring the artwork from that album. For those listening who haven't seen it, the art is this slightly awkward, bug-eyed, alien-looking frog known as Jeremiah the Innocent.
Which is just such a striking, strange visual.
Very unique.
And because Cobain was, arguably the biggest rock star on the planet at the time, anytime he was photographed in that shot by major magazines, millions of people were exposed to Daniel Johnston's artwork. Cobain even explicitly listed Johnston's cassette Yip Jump Music as one of his top favorite albums ever in his journals.
Right. And in the pre-internet era, a cosign like that from a figure like Cobain, that was a cultural mandate.
It was everything.
It signaled to the entire industry that this was the next frontier of authenticity. So suddenly, the spotlight of the global music industry pivots, and it points directly at Daniel Johnston. But the timing creates this just grotesque paradox.
Right, because this massive surge in industry interest happens in the mid-90s, right? Following the 1990 plane crash we discussed at the start of the deep dive.
Exactly.
As a direct result of that manic episode in the cockpit, Johnston was involuntarily committed to a psychiatric hospital.
So you have this incredibly surreal, almost dystopian situation happening. The most powerful A&R executives in the world, artists and repertoire, the people at the record labels holding the massive checkbook.
The ones deciding who gets signed.
Right. They are flying down to Texas. They are engaging in this fierce bidding war, waving multi-album contracts around, trying to secure the signature of a man who is actively locked inside a psychiatric ward.
Wait, I have to jump in here and just push back on this narrative a bit.
Sure.
Looking at this intense bidding war, was the music industry actually interested in nurturing Daniel Johnston's talent? Or were they just trying to exploit a highly vulnerable outsider simply because they were desperate to capture whatever Kurt Cobain thought was cool? It feels incredibly predatory.
What's fascinating here is that your instinct points to a really deep structural divide in how Johnston was treated by his peers versus how he was treated by the corporate machinery.
Okay, how so?
Well, on the artist's side, the admiration was grounded in genuine respect for his songwriting. Take the musician Kathy McCarty, for example. Johnston had handed her one of his tapes back in 1985 after a show.
Just hand to hand, like always.
Exactly. And years later, in 1994, she didn't just casually endorse him. She recorded an entire, fully produced tribute album of his songs called Dead Dog's Eyeball.
Wow.
Yeah, and she then toured North America specifically to elevate his songwriting. She wanted to show the world that beneath all the tape hiss, these were brilliantly constructed pop songs. That is pure artistic respect.
Right. But the corporate side operates on a totally different logic, doesn't
Right.
it? They're just looking for a product they can scale.
And that's exactly where the friction occurs. His decision-making process during this bidding war was heavily filtered through his mental illness, which completely baffled the executives.
He didn't know what to do with them.
Not at all. For example, he was offered a massive, highly lucrative deal with Elektra Records, like a life-changing amount of money.
Yeah.
And he rejected it outright.
And he did reject it because of, like, disputes over royalties or wanting to retain his master recordings, right?
No.
He rejected Elektra because the heavy metal band Metallica was on their roster.
Right.
Johnston genuinely believed that Metallica was satanic, and he was absolutely terrified that they would physically harm him if he joined the same label.
And the executives, they just didn't know how to process that.
How could they?
Right. So he eventually dropped his longtime manager, signed with someone new, and ended up landing a deal with Atlantic Records. They actually paired him with Paul Leary, the guitarist from the Butthole Surfers, to produce his 1994 album, Fun.
Which was his very first time recording in a proper professional studio environment.
Yes. But, it didn't last.
It couldn't last, could it?
No, the corporate machine is built for traditional promotion cycles, right?
Yeah.
Tours, press junkets, late-night television appearances. It is fundamentally not designed to provide the deep, structural, psychological, and emotional support required by an artist managing severe bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
The executive who originally championed his signing, a man named Danny Goldberg, he eventually left Atlantic Records. And the literal moment Goldberg was gone, the label's patience completely evaporated.
Just gone.
Without their internal champion, Atlantic dropped Johnston just 2 years later in 1996. The label just couldn't figure out how to market a non-traditional artist once the initial novelty of that Nirvana association faded away.
So the machine basically just chewed him up and spat him out.
Exactly.
But the beautiful irony of all this is that Johnston's art was practically designed to bypass that corporate machine entirely. Moving past that major label era, his influence proved it didn't need a massive conglomerate to survive. The culture itself had already caught him.
Oh, his work had embedded itself permanently into the cultural bedrock by then. By the 2000s and 2010s, you see this massive organic renaissance of his work that requires zero corporate pushing.
None at all.
In 2004, a 2-disc tribute album is released, featuring all these heavyweight artists reinterpreting his catalog.
Huge names.
You had people like Tom Waits, Beck, The Flaming Lips, Bright Eyes, and Death Cabs for Cutie all participating.
And it extended far beyond just cover songs, too.
Yeah.
In 2005, a Texas theater company created an award-winning rock opera based entirely on his music. It was called Speeding Motorcycle.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that same year, a documentary chronicling his life, his art, and his profound struggles, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. It was called The Devil and Daniel Johnston.
I remember that one.
It actually won the Director's Award there, which brought his story to an entirely new demographic of independent film fans.
And we haven't even touched on how his visual art transcended his music.
Oh, the art is so important.
Going back to Jeremiah the Innocent, that iconic frog from the album cover that Kurt Cobain wore in 1993, a record store in Austin called Sound Exchange commissioned Johnston to paint a mural of that frog on the exterior side of their building.
Yes.
The evolution of that specific mural is essentially this proxy war for the soul of Austin as the city underwent all this rapid gentrification.
It's an incredible mini-epic of urban preservation, really. Because the record store eventually closed its doors in 2003. And then, a year later, a Baja Fresh franchise bought the building and promptly announced plans to knock down the wall featuring Johnston's mural.
Which did not go over well.
No. The neighborhood locals completely revolted.
They basically formed what was essentially a human shield. The community rallied with such intensity and public pressure that they literally forced the corporate managers and the demolition contractors to halt their plans entirely.
They made them leave the mural completely intact.
Right.
It survived the Baja Fresh era. Then the building was purchased and turned into a Thai restaurant, which was very cleverly named Ty, how are you?
Ah, that's great.
And even when that business closed and the entire building was physically demolished in 2023 to make way for new development, the developers left that single wall standing all by itself amidst the rubble.
They had to.
They legally committed to integrating his original artwork into whatever structure gets built there next. I mean, that is a staggering level of cultural staying power for a guy who used to hand out cassettes with French fries.
It really is. His visual art resonated globally, too. It wasn't just a local Texas phenomenon. He held gallery shows in London, New York, and Sacramento. He authored and illustrated a comic book called Space Ducks.
Space Ducks?
Yeah, and he even entered the world of high fashion, collaborating on multiple clothing lines with the highly exclusive streetwear brand Supreme.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting to me. The sheer contrast between his personal reality and his cultural reach is just wild.
He's totally unmatched.
He was not a tech-savvy individual.
Yeah.
No, he preferred his cassette tapes, his markers, and his paper. But in 2009, a development studio created a platform game for the iPhone called Hi, How Are You?
An iPhone game.
An iPhone game. It featured all of his distinctive art and his music, and it functioned somewhat like a psychedelic version of the classic game Frogger. The developers actually brought the game to him to play, and he genuinely enjoyed it, despite the fact that he was completely unfamiliar with the concept of iPhones.
He didn't even know what an iPhone was.
Right. His art was operating on the absolute bleeding edge of global digital culture, while he was still just a guy from Texas who liked to draw.
He wasn't chasing the culture at all. The culture was constantly trying to catch up to him.
Exactly.
He was just expressing exactly what was in his head, and the world just kept finding ways to adapt that expression into new mediums.
Yeah.
Which really brings us to the final act of his life. After decades of battling severe health issues, both mental and physical, and touring intermittently when he was able, Johnston announced his final live tour in the fall of 2017.
And the format of this final tour is just deeply poignant.
It really is.
His lifelong journey brought him right back to where he started, playing music for people who truly wanted to listen. But this time, he wasn't sitting alone in a bedroom with a boombox. He was backed by an entire generation of artists whose own careers were shaped by his influence.
He didn't need a record label to hire studio musicians for him anymore.
Not at all.
Every stop on that tour featured a completely different backing band, made up of highly successful musicians who owed a creative debt to his legacy.
Like who?
Well, in Chicago, he was backed by Jeff Tweedy of Wilco. In the Pacific Northwest, it was the indie rock band Built to Spill.
Wow.
In New Orleans, the Preservation Hall Jazz Band stepped in. It was this rotating cast of musical heavyweights voluntarily stepping up to hold him up and support his music. They were essentially serving as his disciples.
A live album was actually released from those Chicago shows, and the proceeds benefited the Hi, How Are You project.
Which is a great organization.
It is. That's a mental health nonprofit, started with the support of his family to encourage open conversations about mental well-being. It cemented his legacy not just as a musician, but as an advocate, simply through the act of existing and surviving as long as he did.
Yes.
Sadly, the factual conclusion of his life arrived shortly after that. On September 11, 2019, Johnston passed away at his home in Waller, Texas, from a suspected heart attack.
He was 58 years old, and he had just been discharged from the hospital after dealing with some kidney problems.
He was buried at Magnolia Cemetery in Katy, Texas, surrounded by his family, his friends, and the fans who had fiercely protected and followed his work for decades.
It was a very fitting end.
It was. So what does this all mean? We've traced the path of a man who started by forcing homemade cassette tapes into the hands of fast food customers.
Yeah.
A man who survived severe psychosis, who rejected the biggest corporate labels in the world, and who ultimately became an immovable pillar of modern indie folk. His songs have been interpreted by some of the most famous voices of our time, and his art literally shaped the physical architecture of the city he loved.
And when you step back and look at the entirety of his life, it raises an incredibly important question, something for you to mull over long after this deep dive is finished.
What's that?
Johnston's life forces us to interrogate how society views the concept of the tortured genius.
Well, that's a big one.
Right. Do we, as consumers of art, run the risk of romanticizing the very real, agonizing mental struggles of artists like Daniel Johnston?
Right. Do we sometimes turn a person's actual pain into our own aesthetic entertainment?
Exactly. Or, on the flip side, does the widespread global love for his unvarnished, vulnerable art prove something much more hopeful?
Like what?
Perhaps it proves that humanity fundamentally craves emotional honesty above all the slick commercial perfection the industry tries to sell us.
I'd like to think so.
The line between the myth we build around an outsider artist and the actual lived experience of the man is incredibly thin.
It's a tension we might never fully resolve, honestly. But I keep thinking back to that moment in the cockpit in 1990.
Yeah.
Handing out your homemade tapes to strangers at a McDonald's
Yeah.
is a complete surrender of control over your art.
Totally.
Tossing the keys out of an airplane window is the ultimate surrender of control over your life. Both are acts of sheer chaos. But when he threw those keys, he didn't crash into the earth. The trees caught him.
Wow.
And in a very similar way, when he surrendered his art to the world, the community, the fans, the peers, the culture, they caught him. And they gave his legacy a safe place to land.